Another prologue. Now I'm going to write another story, seemingly very different from that take on the Deer movie. This ties into the previous ideas, just as everything dealing with humans will always connect. It deals with priorities, not priorities in terms of things to do, but priorities of the mind. The story has to do with human instinct and consciousness. It deals with the power of the mind, but also the relativity of it, that it isn't just one singular assumed necessity that is meaningless to try and broaden. The story is meant to show how our human subconscious is a big part of our mentality, and that our existence often involves much more than what we end up seeing. This is the message. It isn't a trick. There is no alternative point I truly wish to make, other than the point of continuing to write a story, when I've already explained the point of it. Those 2 points are connected, however, and I'm sure you will pick up on that. This story takes place at a point in history. Well, if we could look at all of history, even just human history, these events wouldn't be much more than an invisible point on that timeline. There once were 2 human beings. One was a man and the other was a woman. For as long as they could remember, they had lived on a piece of land. It was the only land they knew, and if you asked them, they would tell you it was an island. They would tell you this because they had walked around it. The land was not small, being that they had lived there their entire lives. They'd had plenty of time to get to know it. Each of them knew a lot about their surroundings. They knew about how the animals act. They knew which were a threat and which were harmless. They understood the hierarchy and made a connection between these creatures and themselves. They realized that they and other animals had to perform certain actions and duties in order to keep their island functioning the way it did. They knew what plants benefited them, which were bad for them, and how so. They even knew things beyond their immediate environment. They knew that sometimes the tide gets high and that storms could cause a flood. They knew that the sun provided heat and light. They knew when it came up and when it went down each day. They lived their lives based on all of their knowledge. They worked to fit into this world the best they saw fit. They had learned to live so comfortably that they had no reason to challenge their existence. They built shelters to protect themselves from other animals and the environment. They hunted, gathered, and cooked the food available in order to survive. There was so much food that they often ate more than they needed. They domesticated a dog, which they called their pet. The dog provided a sort of friendship, helped them hunt, and helped protect them. So, they lived their lives as they always had. They woke up when it was beneficial to do so. They fornicated as they wished. They ate, played, worked, felt, thought, emoted, napped, and imagined. They were just a couple of humans on an island. The couple aged as decades passed. They aged gracefully and happily. The lives they had known had been filled with all that they had hoped. In their later years, believing their time was almost up, they explored new areas, took chances they had never taken, and just loved life in a carefree manner. One day, while the 2 were holding hands on the beach and staring at the sunset over the ocean, the man had an odd thought. He asked the woman what he had been asking himself. What if there is more? What if there is something we missed out on? She laughed and held him, telling him how lucky they were to live the wonderful lives they had. Days went by, but the man could not shake this idea. One morning, he went out in the water to fish. He wasn't having much success. His desire to find out if there was something out there overtook him. He hiked a rocky outcrop. He sat at the edge of a cliff he had sat at hundreds of times before. He sat and thought. As he thought about the unshakable idea that more is out there, he looked out at the endless ocean and, to his amazement, saw something. At first, he thought he might be getting senile, so he thought again. He shook his head and did a double take. As he looked out, he saw a tiny sliver of land. As he continued to look, he continued to believe what he was seeing was truly there, and the tiny sliver grew. Before he knew it, the entire ocean was land he previously couldn't even conceive of, and land he now was sure really existed. In complete excitement, he ran down to the shelter to share this news with the woman. He told her all about it, the seemingly infinite land all around them. She didn't believe a word he said. It was so contradictory to all that she had ever seen and known. She couldn't even wrap her head around the idea. He tried to convince her and walked far out onto the land he once considered water. In her mind, he just walked on water, so she screamed for him to come back. He came back, and much to his dismay, he couldn't convince her there was no ocean, despite continuing to try. He thought she had. He thought he had to be magic and asked how he did it. He simply couldn't show or teach her what he now knew as the truth and reality. The woman was afraid of what she saw and didn't want to talk or think about it. The man did not want to lose her or the rest of what he knew, but he also could not ignore this unknown reality. He finally agreed to drop it for the night, but stayed up all night thinking about it and feeling torn between the decision of whether or not he should go discover it. He finally fell asleep early in the morning. Hours later, the woman woke up to a beautiful sunrise over the water. She let him sleep and thought about the idea of there being something out there. She hiked up to the cliff and considered the idea, mainly because she wanted it to be true. If the man even just believed he saw something out there, she did not want to be alone. After some time, she thought she saw something. She wiped her eyes and looked again. She could no longer see it, but convinced herself it was there. She was happy about what she told herself she saw. She hurried down to tell the man. She shook him and yelled his name, but he passed away in his sleep. When she realized he was dead, she lost her composure and panicked. She couldn't live comfortably without him. She swam towards the land she hoped was in the distance to look for answers. She left what she knew to try and discover what she didn't. As far as she'd swam, however, it never seemed to get closer. She swam for hours. She swam till she could swim no more. She cried as she kept herself afloat. She recognized that she was going to die and that everything she was ending. Just before she went under, she looked all around. As far as she could see, land appeared. The endless ocean was becoming endless land. As she sunk and reached towards the surface, the land covered the final part of the ocean above her. So, what is all this story business about, and why write it after stating what it means? And is it real? I said it took place. First, I want you to imagine the above story as just a story or a dream or thoughts as ideas in your head only. Do not think of it as the real exterior world, but think of it as a real world. No, I'm completely serious. It isn't always easy for us to do, but think of everything that goes on in your mind as reality. If you don't do this, if you don't honestly know your mentality as perfectly real, then you can never care for it. You can never affect it. So now that your beliefs, thoughts, ideas, hopes, knowledge, dreams, nightmares, desires, fears, conclusions, questions, answers, and confusions are real, we can look at this story differently. We can look at this scenario as really happening. I thought it, and you at the very least made assumptions of those thoughts by reading and absorbing it. Reality and the perception of something are not limited to an external view, which of course is still internal anyway. You can perceive what you mentally manifest. You can't give a thought a hug. You can't see what desire looks like. You can't hear your willpower. But they are just as real as anything else. We can and do very quickly call people who we believe perceive things we do not crazy or strange. We are all inherently tied to our own individual perception. This perception is limited to the capabilities of our humanity and the reality of our surroundings. It's our only link to existence. However, the limitations of our abilities and in turn our perceptions are often incomplete or false. We can only believe what we believe and know what we know, because we can only see what we see. Differences between our perceptions do not equate to different capabilities to perceive. In other words, Just because someone sees something you do not doesn't mean you cannot see it. It just means that you currently do not. We so often consider other humans to be extremely different from us based solely on our limited view of their limited view. It's like we subconsciously believe our human perceptions are omniscient or all-knowing, even automatically all-knowing. Even our ultimate capabilities don't allow for such a view. However, internal omniscience, or knowing everything about you by perceiving everything about you, is not nearly as far-fetched. There are all these parts of our humanity/mentality that influence, alter, and actually create perception. Our perception is not only not external, but there is much more to its internal presence than we automatically can consider. We all possess the same traits. How strongly certain traits influence our perception is the only difference. By looking at these traits and considering them truthfully, we gain the ability to alter our perception. The only other option is for the subconscious ability of the mind, ourselves, to determine it for us. There are 3 states of being mentally. You can just exist, you can see for yourself, or you can control what you do as well. Story-wise, you can live on an island. You can broaden your horizons, or you can move towards those horizons. We exist either in a subconscious auto-drive, a conscious flight, or a combination of the two. Your mentality is either going around hitting inherent hotspots while you rest in the backseat, you are in control, or you are able to see but not do. We are either aware or we are not, and we are either in control or we are not. Again, I am not talking about in our external life. Even though it does come into play, of course, do not think about anything outside of your mind for a while. Our minds are their own worlds, which we ourselves often fail to explore. To get anything from this book, it will help you to start relating everything to your brain, because really, the stuff that goes on in there determines who you are. What has gone on in human brains has played the main role in determining what has gone on in humanity, as well as much of the exterior. There are a lot of factors as to why we see what we do internally, but if you don't even consider what you're seeing internally, certain factors will surely determine it for you. Even when we look, and even when we know what we are seeing, these factors still can throw us into autopilot. In short, I am writing this book because I have very frequently been stuck on that island while knowing more is out there or in there, as the case is. I believe you have as well. I just want to remind both of us that there's a lot to explore and experience.